The plant floor went dead quiet. That's when you know something's really wrong in manufacturing. I stood there watching 315 workers just stop what they were doing, staring at screens that wouldn't respond, machines that wouldn't start their next cycle. The overnight supervisor jogged over, sweat already beading on his forehead despite the morning chill. "Wade, the whole system's locked up. Nobody can access anything. Production lines down, quality controls down, even basic inventory tracking." He paused, catching his breath. What the hell happened? I knew exactly what happened. My name's Wade Morrison. I'm 54, and I've been working this plant for 24 years. Started as a floor engineer after getting out of the Navy. Worked my way up to lead production engineer. Yesterday morning, they locked me out of my own systems. Today, they're learning what that actually means. Let me back up. 18 months ago, our parent company dropped a $2.3 million efficiency overhaul project in my lap. Plant productivity was down 14%, waste was up 19%, and corporate was making noises about shutting us down if we couldn't turn it around. They gave me full authority to redesign everything: workflow, equipment placement, quality protocols, the works. I didn't just reorganize the floor, I rebuilt it from the ground up. Studied every bottleneck, every wasted motion, every inefficient handoff. Spent nights here with stopwatches and clipboards mapping material flows like battle plans. The algorithms I developed weren't just spreadsheet formulas. They were 24 years of knowing exactly how this place actually worked. You learn things in the Navy about systems and processes. Everything has to work together, or people die. That kind of discipline doesn't leave you when you hang up the uniform. When I looked at this plant, I saw the same thing. A complex system where one failure could cascade into disaster. The difference was, here the disaster meant 315 families losing their paychecks instead of sailors losing their lives. The first thing I did was walk every inch of this floor with the workers themselves. Not the supervisors, not the team leads, but the people who actually touch the product 8 hours a day. Scott Richardson from maintenance showed me how the conveyor system created a 52-second delay every cycle because parts came in at the wrong angle. Ashley Morgan from Quality Control explained why the inspection sequence was backwards, catching problems that should have been prevented 3 stations earlier. Nobody had ever asked them before. I spent 2 months just listening, learning that the official process documentation hadn't been updated in 7 years, discovering that half our efficiency problems came from workers creating workarounds to fix design flaws that management didn't know existed. These people weren't just following procedures, they were actively preventing disasters every single day and getting no credit for it. It reminded me of my time on the USS Indianapolis, not the famous one, but a supply ship where I learned that the best solutions come from the guys who actually do the work, not the officers who read about it in manuals. The chief petty officers always knew what was really happening below decks. Same principle applied here. The redesign took 9 months to implement. We didn't shut down production. Instead, I created a rolling upgrade system, optimizing one section at a time while the rest kept running. Every change got tested by the people who'd have to use it. Every improvement was explained to the workers before implementation, not after. I made sure everyone understood not just what we were changing, but why. That's another thing the Navy teaches you. People work better when they understand the mission. You don't just tell a sailor to turn a valve, you explain how that valve affects the whole ship. Same here. When Tommy Rodriguez understood how his station's timing affected the entire production line, he started suggesting improvements I never would have thought of. The resistance came from middle management, not the floor. Supervisors worried that empowering workers would make them irrelevant. Department heads complained that the new protocols required them to actually understand the processes they managed. The old system let them manage by metrics and reports. The new system required them to manage by walking around and talking to people. I'd seen this before in the military, officers who wanted to command from behind desks instead of leading from the front. They never lasted long in real operations. Problem was, this wasn't the military. I couldn't just transfer them to desk jobs on shore. I had to work around them. But the numbers don't lie. Within 8 months, productivity was up 22%. Waste was down 28%. Worker injuries dropped 35% because the new layouts made sense instead of just looking good on paper. More importantly, people started caring about their work again. When you ask someone for their expertise and then actually use it, They become invested in the results. The transformation wasn't just about efficiency metrics, it was about dignity. These workers had been treated like interchangeable parts for years, blamed for problems they didn't create, ignored when they offered solutions. My system changed that. Suddenly, Maria Santos wasn't just Quality Control Station 7. She was the person who caught a design flaw that would have cost us $200,000 in recalls. Corporate noticed. Other plants started asking for my protocols. I got invited to speak at manufacturing conferences. Industry publications wanted to feature our turnaround. For the first time in my career, I felt like I was building something that would last, something that mattered beyond this quarter's numbers. That's when Julian Foster showed up. Fresh MBA from MIT, 29 years old, hired as operations consultant to oversee the final implementation phase. Corporate's idea of adding strategic oversight to my project. Julian had all the buzzwords: digital transformation, data-driven optimization, synergistic workflows. He also had the new CFO's ear, a guy who'd been brought in 10 months earlier to modernize our operational approach. The CFO, Lance Carter, came from the tech sector. He believed that manufacturing was just another software problem waiting to be solved with the right algorithms and dashboards. He'd never worked a factory floor, never dealt with the reality of managing 315 people who show up at 6 a.m. regardless of whether the systems are working. To him, Julian represented the future. Young, educated, fluent in the language of modern business. I represented the past, old school experience in a world that supposedly didn't need that anymore. Julian started attending my meetings, asking to review my documentation, wanting copies of everything. Just getting up to speed, he'd say. Want to understand the full scope so I can support you better. He was polite, enthusiastic, full of praise for what I had accomplished. I figured having management backing couldn't hurt. The project was working. Numbers don't lie, and I had nothing to hide. That was my first mistake. Julian was smart. I'll give him that. He didn't attack my results directly. Instead, he started questioning my methods. In meetings, he'd mention industry best practices that supposedly showed better approaches. He'd bring up articles about legacy thinking holding back manufacturing innovation, always framed as constructive suggestions, never direct criticism. But I started noticing the pattern. Every suggestion involved replacing human judgment with automated systems. Every improvement meant fewer workers making decisions and more algorithms making them instead. Julian wasn't interested in optimizing what we'd built. He was interested in replacing it with something that didn't require people like me to understand it. The CFO ate it up. Here's this young guy with fresh ideas talking about taking our improvements to the next level. Meanwhile, I'm the old-timer who's resistant to new approaches. Julian made sure to position himself as the bridge between my valuable experience and cutting-edge methodology. What really bothered me wasn't the corporate politics. I'd dealt with that for 24 years. What bothered me was watching Julian miss the point entirely. He'd walk the floor with his tablet, taking notes about optimization opportunities, but he never actually talked to the workers. When Scott Richardson tried to explain why a particular sequence mattered, Julian would nod politely and then suggest we leverage automation to eliminate the human variable entirely. He didn't understand that the human variable wasn't a bug in the system. It was the feature that made everything else work. In the Navy, we had a saying, trust but verify. Julian seemed trustworthy enough, but I should have been verifying what he was actually doing with all that access I'd given him. The kid was learning my system, all right, learning it like someone who planned to replace it. 4 months before the final rollout, Julian requested access to my core algorithms. The board wants to understand the technical foundation, he explained. They need confidence that our approach is scalable to other facilities. Made sense. I gave him read-only access to the systems. I should have paid more attention to what he was actually doing with that access. Julian wasn't just reviewing my work, he was studying it like someone preparing to recreate it. He'd spend hours in the system, not just reading the algorithms, but tracing through every decision tree, every conditional statement, every exception handler I'd built in. When I asked about his progress, he'd mentioned being impressed by the sophistication and wanting to fully understand the architecture. Looking back, the signs were all there. He'd ask questions about edge cases. What happens when this fails? How does the system handle that exception? Where are the potential vulnerabilities? I thought he was being thorough. Turns out he was mapping weak points. 3 weeks later, he was back asking for editing privileges. Found some potential optimization opportunities, he said. Minor adjustments that could boost our results by another 18%. He had a presentation ready, full of charts showing projected improvements that looked impressive on paper. I should have said no. Should have asked to see his analysis first, demanded to understand exactly what he wanted to change and why. But the numbers were already so good, and 18% more would make this project legendary. Plus, Julian had Carter's backing, and Carter controlled the budget for next year's expansion. I gave him the access. That's when things started going sideways, but so gradually I didn't notice at first. Julian began showing up for early morning system reviews that I wasn't invited to. He'd schedule meetings with department heads without looping me in. When I asked about it, he'd say he was gathering stakeholder input to ensure smooth change management. The language started changing too. In meetings, people stopped talking about Wade's system and started referring to the operational framework. My algorithms became the optimization protocols. The relationships I'd built with workers became stakeholder engagement initiatives. Everything was getting rebranded with corporate speak that made it sound like anyone could have done it. That's when I started getting that familiar feeling from the military, when you know someone's positioning to take your command but you can't quite prove it yet. Nicole Palmer, our plant supervisor, pulled me aside one Tuesday. Nicole's been here 18 years, worked her way up from the line to supervision through pure competence. She knows every worker by name, understands every process intimately, and doesn't waste time on politics. More importantly, she's got that same radar for trouble that good petty officers develop. Wade, something's off. Julian's been asking questions about your algorithms, but not normal questions. He wants to know what happens if certain protocols get modified, keeps pushing scenarios where the systems might fail. She lowered her voice. He's also been talking to people about sustainable leadership transition and knowledge transfer protocols. That phrase hit me wrong. Knowledge transfer usually means one thing in corporate America. They're getting ready to fire someone and want to make sure their work can continue without them. What kind of scenarios is he asking about? Peak production periods, system overloads. What happens if the worker feedback loops get disabled? What happens if the algorithms run without the human oversight components? Nicole paused. Wade, those aren't optimization questions. Those are sabotage questions. The pieces started clicking together. Julian wasn't trying to improve my system. He was studying how to break it in ways that would look like design flaws rather than sabotage. Create problems that would justify replacing the whole approach with his automated solution. That night, I stayed late to check the system logs. What I found made my stomach drop. Julian had been making changes, small ones buried deep in complex subroutines, but changes nonetheless. He'd modified error handling protocols, adjusted timing sequences, and altered the feedback mechanisms that allowed workers to signal problems before they became critical. When I ran projections on his modifications, they didn't improve anything. If anything, they introduced potential failure points. The changes were subtle, but systematic, designed to create exactly the kind of cascading failures that would make the whole system look unstable under stress. I confronted him the next morning. Julian, I noticed some alterations to the core protocols. Can you walk me through the reasoning? He didn't miss a beat. Just some minor calibrations based on the latest performance data, nothing that changes your fundamental approach, just optimizing the execution. He pulled up a presentation I'd never seen. I've been tracking some metrics that suggest we can push efficiency gains even higher. The presentation was impressive. Charts, graphs, projections showing 35% improvement over baseline. Problem was, the data didn't match what I was seeing on the floor. Some of the metrics he was citing didn't even exist in our tracking systems. Others were extrapolated from single data points, or based on theoretical maximums that ignored real-world constraints. Where did these numbers come from? Predictive modeling based on industry benchmarks and system capacity analysis. Julian clicked through slides with the confidence of someone who'd never had to explain a production line failure to 315 angry workers. The algorithms show significant headroom for improvement if we can eliminate some of the current bottlenecks. By bottlenecks, he meant the safety protocols and human oversight systems that prevented disasters. That's when I realized what was happening. Julian wasn't trying to improve my project. He was setting it up to fail in a way that would make his solution look necessary. His modifications would cause system conflicts during peak production periods, create bottlenecks that would look like design flaws, generate false error reports that would make the whole thing seem unstable. When the project crashed, he'd be there with his improved version, ready to save the day with a fully automated system that didn't require people like me to understand it. Carter would get his modern, technology-driven solution. Julian would get his promotion, and I'd be the old-timer whose outdated approach couldn't handle the demands of modern manufacturing. The beauty of it was that I'd given him everything he needed: the system access, the technical documentation, even the credibility that came from working under my authority. He'd studied my work just long enough to know where to break it. I started building my defense that same night. First thing was backing up all my original algorithms to a personal server, complete with timestamps and change logs that would prove what I'd built versus what Julian had modified. Then I started having quiet conversations with key people about what they had observed. Scott Richardson confirmed what I suspected. Julian's been asking about equipment tolerance limits. What happens if systems get pushed beyond design specs? Says he needs to understand failure modes for risk management. Scott paused, adjusting his work gloves. But Wade, those aren't risk management questions. Those are sabotage questions. He wants to know exactly how much stress it takes to break something. Rachel Barnes from the union had her own concerns. He's been inquiring about grievance procedures, asking how quickly we can replace workers if there are performance issues during the transition. Talking about bringing in temporary contractors who are more adaptable to new systems. Rachel's been fighting for workers here longer than I've been in management. She understands power dynamics and how they really work. Wade, he's planning to blame the workers when his changes fail. Set it up so the human element looks like the problem, not his modifications. Brett Hamilton, who runs our equipment maintenance contracts, had the most damaging information. Julian contacted me directly about modifying some of the safety protocols in our service agreements. Wanted to know if we could streamline some of the redundancy systems to improve efficiency. I told him any changes had to go through you first. Brett and I go back 14 years. His company services half the plants in the region. He knows what works and what doesn't. Wade, he didn't like that answer. Started asking about replacing our maintenance contract with a company that would be more flexible about safety standards. The picture was getting clearer. Julian wasn't just planning to sabotage my algorithms. He was systematically removing every safety net, every human oversight system, every relationship-based quality control that made the operation actually work. When the inevitable failures happened, he'd blame outdated systems, resistant workers, and unrealistic safety requirements. Then he'd implement his solution: a fully automated system with minimal human input, streamlined safety protocols, and maintenance contracts that prioritized cost over reliability. It would look great in quarterly reports right up until someone got seriously hurt or the plant had a catastrophic failure. 1 week before the final rollout, I got called into a board meeting. The CFO was there along with Julian and 2 executives I didn't recognize from corporate. They had charts and presentations ready, which told me this wasn't going to be a discussion. Wade, we appreciate everything you've built here, Carter started. The improvements have been significant. However, we've identified some concerns about the sustainability of your approach. Julian took over, clicking to his first slide. The systems Wade designed work, but they're essentially black boxes. If something goes wrong, only he can fix them. That creates unacceptable risk for a multi-million-dollar operation. We need more transparent, standardized protocols. He walked through his presentation methodically, charts showing my algorithms as overly complex, graphs demonstrating how my approach created dangerous single points of failure, risk assessments that painted my reliance on worker feedback as subjective decision-making that compromises consistency. Every concern they raised was manufactured. Every risk they identified was created by Julian's modifications, but they had corporate buzzwords, colorful charts, and the confidence that comes from never having to explain a production failure to real people. Furthermore, Julian continued, the current system requires extensive tribal knowledge that isn't properly documented. Wade's approach works when he's here to troubleshoot, but it's not scalable or transferable to other facilities. That stung because there was a grain of truth in it. My system did rely heavily on relationships and institutional knowledge, but that wasn't a bug. It was a feature. You can't automate 24 years of experience or replace the judgment that comes from actually understanding how things work. We think it's best if I take operational control for the final implementation phase, Julian concluded. Wade can stay involved in a consulting capacity, but we need someone with fresh eyes managing the day-to-day execution. I sat there watching my own project get stolen in real time. The two corporate executives nodded along like they understood what they were voting on. Carter looked relieved to finally have someone speaking his language. Julian looked confident, professional, ready to take charge. "What exactly are you planning to change?" I asked. "Nothing fundamental," Julian assured me. "Just some efficiency optimizations and risk mitigation protocols. The core of what you built remains intact." That was a lie, and we both knew it, but the decision was already made. They handed me a revised org chart with Julian as lead operations director, and my name moved to senior technical advisor. Consulting role, no system access, no direct authority, just valuable input when requested. I should have fought harder right then. Should have demanded they examine Julian's modifications, called out the manufactured data, insisted on a technical review by people who actually understood manufacturing. But I was tired. 18 months of 16-hour days, of caring more about this place than anyone else in that room, of being the only person who seemed to understand that 315 jobs depended on getting this right. Part of me wanted to let someone else carry the weight for once. That was my second mistake. They locked me out that afternoon. Security badge deactivated, system account suspended, even my parking spot reassigned. Temporary measure, they said, just while we transition operational authority. Julian walked me to my car, all fake sympathy and professional courtesy. "Don't take this personally, Wade. Your work here has been incredible. We just need to ensure continuity going forward." He paused at my driver's door. "Get some rest. You've earned it." I drove home and spent the evening staring at my backup servers, looking at 18 months of work that was about to get twisted into someone else's victory. But as I sat there, something shifted in my thinking. They could lock me out of the office, but they couldn't lock me out of the relationships I'd built. The trust I'd earned with workers, vendors, and union representatives didn't get transferred just because they changed my title on an org chart. That's when I started making calls. First call was to Nicole. "They locked me out," I told her. "Julian's running the show now." Her response was immediate. "That's insane. He doesn't know half of what you built. Hell, he doesn't know a quarter of it. Doesn't matter. He's got corporate backing and a fancy presentation. Wade, listen to me. This place runs on relationships, not presentations. People trust you. They don't know Julian from Adam, and they sure don't trust him with their livelihoods." Second call was to Rachel. "They can lock you out of the office," she said. "They can't lock you out of people's trust. You know what happens when Julian's modifications start causing problems? People are going to call you, not him. And when they do, we'll be ready." The third call was to Brett. "They've got a new guy running my project now, Julian Foster. He might be calling about equipment modifications. You recommending him?" "I'm not recommending anything. Just letting you know there's been a change in management." Brett understood immediately. "In our business, personal recommendations matter more than corporate org charts. Trust gets earned over years and lost in minutes." Julian might have Carter's authority, but he didn't have anyone's confidence. That was yesterday. Today, the whole plant ground to a halt because Julian's modifications created exactly the system failures I knew they would. The overnight production run hit the first cascade failure at 3:52 a.m. By morning shift, nothing worked. I stayed home, let my phone go to voicemail. Julian called 8 times, Carter called 5 times, corporate called 3 times, Nicole called once with a status update, and I took that one. "It's a complete mess," she said. Julian's running around with printouts trying to figure out why the systems are rejecting the production schedules. The modified protocols are conflicting with the equipment firmware. Workers are standing around getting paid to do nothing because nobody can tell them what to do. What's Julian saying? That it's a temporary integration issue that will be resolved shortly. Problem is, his modifications broke the diagnostic routines too. The system can't even tell us what's wrong, let alone how to fix it. Nicole paused. "Wade, people are scared. They're asking if the plant's going to shut down, if they should be looking for other jobs." I hung up and drove to the diner across from the plant. Same booth by the window where I used to eat lunch during the construction phase. Perfect view of the main entrance and the loading docks. By 10:30 a.m. it was chaos. Delivery trucks backed up down the street because receiving couldn't process incoming materials. Finished goods sitting on the loading dock because shipping couldn't access the inventory database. The overnight supervisor was out in the parking lot chain-smoking and talking on his phone, probably explaining to his wife why he might be late getting home. Workers were gathering in small groups near the employee entrance. Some were checking their phones, others were just talking quietly. I recognized most of them. Scott Richardson from maintenance looking worried. Ashley Morgan from quality control, shaking her head at whatever someone was telling her. These weren't just employees to me. They were people I'd worked with for years, people whose expertise had made my project possible. Watching them stand there helpless while some kid with an MBA destroyed everything we'd built together made my blood boil. My phone buzzed. Text from Nicole. Julian's asking if you left any hidden documentation that might explain the system failures. I told him I'd pass along the message. Another text from Rachel. Workers are asking if you're coming back. They want to know if they should be worried about their jobs. And then the call I was waiting for. Carter, sounding nothing like the confident executive from yesterday's meeting. Wade, we need to talk. There are some technical issues with the rollout that require your input. I'm not involved in operations anymore, remember? This is temporary, just until we stabilize the systems. What systems? I don't have access to any systems. A pause. In the background, I could hear alarms, shouting, the sound of expensive machinery sitting idle. We can restore your access temporarily. Emergency authorization. I let that sit for a moment. What kind of emergency? Production's been down for 8 hours. We're losing $65,000 per hour in missed deliveries. Julian says the issues are related to some legacy protocols that weren't properly documented. Legacy protocols. That's what they were calling my work now. Julian made modifications to the core algorithms without understanding the interdependencies. The failures aren't bugs, they're features of his changes. Another pause. Can you fix it? That was the question I'd been waiting for. Not, will you help us? Not what would you recommend? But can you fix it? Because they already knew that I was the only one who could. Maybe. I'd need full system access, operational authority, and a written guarantee that no one makes changes without my approval. Done. How quickly can you be here? I'm not sure I want to be there. Julian's got this handled, right? Fresh eyes, modern approach, all those industry best practices. The silence stretched long enough that I could hear background noise from the plant floor. More alarms, someone shouting instructions that nobody was following. Wade, please, just get here. I finished my coffee and drove across the street. The security guard who'd been instructed to keep me out yesterday waved me through without checking my badge. Funny how emergencies clarify priorities. Julian was waiting in the lobby, looking like he'd aged 5 years overnight. His presentation folder was tucked under his arm, but nobody was asking for charts and graphs anymore. Thank God you're here. I think there might be some compatibility issues between your original design and some minor optimizations we implemented. Minor optimizations. I almost smiled. For the next 7 hours, I walked him through every modification, explaining how each one created cascading failures throughout the system. It wasn't malicious incompetence. It was just incompetence. Julian understood business theory, but he didn't understand manufacturing reality. He treated the plant like a computer program that could be optimized with better code, not realizing that manufacturing is a complex system where human judgment prevents disasters. The fixes took 9 hours to implement properly, not because they were complicated, but because I had to undo all of Julian's improvements while explaining to him why each change was necessary. He took notes like a graduate student, asking questions that showed he'd never really understood what I'd built. By evening shift, production was back online. By the end of the week, we were running better than we had before Julian's modifications. The workers relaxed, the supervisors stopped looking stressed, and the loading docks returned to their normal, organized chaos. The board meeting happened the following Tuesday. Different tone this time, the 2 corporate executives, who'd nodded along with Julian's presentation, were notably absent. Carter started with an apology and ended with an offer. Senior Operations Director, 35% salary increase, profit-sharing authority, and budget control for a $3.8 million expansion that would add 65 jobs and increase our capacity by 28%. Julian got reassigned to Junior Operations Analyst, reporting directly to me. Learning opportunity, they called it. A chance to understand manufacturing from the ground up. I accepted both offers. For the next 8 months, Julian worked under my supervision, learning what manufacturing actually involves. Not the theory from business school, but the reality of managing 315 people, $68 million in equipment, and production schedules that don't care about your PowerPoint presentations. He turned out to be a decent analyst once he stopped trying to revolutionize everything. The plant's running at 143% of baseline efficiency now. Corporate's using our protocols at 4 other facilities. I've got budget authority for expanding veteran hiring programs and implementing apprenticeship tracks for younger engineers who want to learn the right way. People ask if I regret not just walking away, letting Julian's incompetence destroy everything and proving my point. But here's what I learned. The best revenge isn't watching someone fail. It's being so essential that their failure becomes impossible to ignore. Then using that leverage to build something better. They didn't just lock me out of my project. They locked themselves out of competence. When I came back, it wasn't as the guy who saved the day. It was as the guy they couldn't afford to lose again. That's the kind of victory that lasts. In the end, they thought they were replacing me with someone cheaper and more compliant. What they actually did was replace competence with ambition and discover that ambition without knowledge is just expensive ignorance. The real lesson isn't about workplace politics or corporate betrayal. It's that true expertise can't be stolen, only earned. And when you try to shortcut that process, reality has a way of demanding payment with interest. And every morning when I walk this floor, seeing 315 people with secure jobs and dignity in their work, I know that's worth more than any corporate title they could have given me. Because at the end of the day, you can't download 24 years of experience or automate the kind of judgment that comes from actually giving a damn about the people who do the work.